A drifter paid $2 to stop an auction. The woman he freed refused to leave alone. Heat hummed over the freight yard. Flies ticked against hat brims. Iron scraped wood. A chain clinked like a bad thought trying to speak. He shouldered through the ring of men as if parting chaparral, boots gritty, jaw set, a dusted canvas duster dragging at his knees. And when the auctioneer lifted a red kerchief to start the chant by the stock pens in Sagebrush Ferry, Wyoming territory, high noon early summer, Teller Vance put $2 silver on the cracked plank and said nothing. Only laid those coins like anchors on storm water and cut the rope from the wrists of the woman with a single clean pull of his belt knife. The hush was sharp, the sun was bright, and a hawk made a lonely circle above the telegraph wires. She stood unsteady, slate blue calico dress torn at the hem, grey wool shawl drawn close through the day ran hot, hair dark and damp at the temples, almond eyes steady despite the bruise yellowing along the cheekbone. Name given softly to the clerk, but ignored by most men here, Alma Ridgway, 26, held for a debt that was not hers. Offered as a year of labor under paper that smelled of stale whiskey and fear. And Teller, a drifter with no fixed county. Palm nicked from the rope, scar old along the eyebrow, paid $2 to stop the noise and the bargain and the small laugh that always follows a cheap bid first beat. The foreman spat and reached. Teller turned the knife, blade low, voice flat. The rope fell away. Second beat. The auctioneer grabbed back the coins. Teller's hand closed over them again and left them on the wood. Third beat. Two men in dusters shifted near the corral gate, hands at belt buckles. Fourth beat. Alma stepped behind Teller on her own feet not dragged. Fifth beat. A mule brayed and the sound ran through the crowd like a crack in ice and broke the moment into movement. This was their start. Clean daylight. Names and shape set: Alma Ridgway, the woman freed, Teller Vance, the drifter. Sagebrush Ferry, the where. Early summer 1883, the when. And the visible act in the open yard was exactly what the title promised. 2 coins, 1 blade, a choice made under a sky that gave no shade. Contract's lawful, the foreman barked, voice wet with certainty. She goes where the paper says. He moved in, big shoulders, cheap vest, brass badge not of law, but of the freighting company nailed to the lapel for show. Teller kept the knife down and away. The revolver stayed holstered. Muzzle turned toward dust. He had no interest in killing at noon. Alma felt rope blood leave her wrists in small hot beads. She breathed once, then again. The second breath deeper. The bruised cheek cooled under moving air. She did not run. She did not cry. She put a hand to the shawl, squared her shoulders, and said in a voice that did not shake, "I will not go with you." And when Teller turned as if to step aside so she could walk to the mission house across the lane, she set her palm on his duster sleeve and refused to release, not clinging. Something else, a decision hard as bone. She would not leave him alone. They moved together toward the windmill and the pump trough. Small steps, quick, direct. Teller's grey gelding, Ash, tossed its head by the hitch rail and stamped. Alma kept pace, shawl trailing at her elbow. The foreman shouted for the teamsters, and 3 men came, one with a length of chain, one with a stick, one with a mouth too eager for trouble. The crowd made a half moon and watched, because watching is a kind of betting. Teller lifted Alma onto the trough ledge to free her from jostle, said only her name, quiet. A question wrapped in a warning. Alma nodded, fingers white at the edge of the wood, eyes never leaving the men. The pump wheel clacked. Cold water ran and darkened the dust. A bell from the depot struck the quarter, and a freight whistle blew from downline. The timing of machines argued with the timing of men. Danger rose in a straight line, not a jump. First collision came fast. A freight wagon hit a rut. Its near wheel climbed the edge and dropped. The brake rod snapped. The team lunged. The box slewed toward the crowd and the trough. A barrel broke free and rolled. Men shouted and scattered. Teller caught the wagon pole with both hands and let it drag him 3 steps, while he dropped his weight and twisted. Muscles cording, boots skidding, Ash flinched and jerked back. Alma swung down from the ledge onto the wagon step and hauled the brake chain up barehanded, palms burning, dress torn more at the knee. The roll slowed. The wagon shuddered. The barrel kissed the trough and cracked, but did not explode. Water slopped bright and cold across leather and dust. A child cried somewhere by the hay scale and then fell quiet. Teller's breath came sharp, rope burn fresh across his right palm. He looked to Alma, saw blood along her hands where the chain bit. She hid them in the shawl, chin high as if she had not felt it. A thin red line curved across skin already raw from rope. He wanted to say, "Go, be done with this. Take the mission door and its clean cot." She shook her head before the words came. The refusal lived ahead of speech. She would not leave him alone. They moved, not running, heads up, pace brisk, Ash leading with ears laid back. The foreman's men followed with the certainty of small kings, past the feed store and the blacksmith with a fire like an angry mouth, past the sign for rooms above the mercantile. Teller kept the revolver holstered, hand on the butt only to steady it when his stride jarred. Warning shots belonged to moments that tasted of collapse. This was not yet collapse. They reached the lane out toward Cottonwoods by the shallow ford of Dry Creek. The sun hit them clean, and the wind came cooler from the water. Birds lifted from the mud in quick, nervous flurries. Alma's hair frayed from its pins. The shawl hung crooked. The calico clung damp at the back. Ash blew hard through his nose and dropped a shoulder into the bit. Teller stepped aside to keep the horse between Alma and the men, and said in that same steady, quiet way, "Water, then north." Plan set with 2 words. At the ford the second hazard rose. Not a choice, a fact. Rain in the foothills the night before had given the creek a new voice. Water ran faster than it had in the morning. Not dangerous alone, but made sharp by pursuit. Teller tested depth, knee-high on a horse, quick and strong. They crossed, legs cold, skirts heavy, leather darker against water. Midstream a log turned and thumped Ash's hip. The gelding crow-hopped. Alma's balance slipped. She went to one knee on the creek stones. Shawl dragged, hands shot to rock. Teller turned back in the water, threw the lariat, looped not to trap, but to lend a line. The rope bit his palm where the morning's burn was raw, sting hot enough to wring his teeth. He drew her up, breath matched to her pull, and the two came out together, coiled and wet and still in one piece. Warning shot cracked into the water behind them. Not his, one of the men, muzzle pointed low, but impatience loud. The splash sent trout skipping and put rings on the surface like clockwork. On the north bank Talus waited, loose shale, sullen sage, slope steep to a shelf road cut by miners a season back. Ash grunted and leaned for the climb. Alma set both hands to the horse's withers, used strength not grace. Dressed dark with water from mid-thigh down, Teller's breath steadied. The men hit the ford late and cursed. One slipped and went to a hip. Gun held high, hat gone. The foreman shouted orders that came apart in spray and wind. They reached the shelf, a ribbon along a brown hill wide enough for one wagon or 2 riders tight. To the right fell a drop decorated with yucca and a white rib cage of some old steer. To the left rose a wall where oranges of iron bled through stone. A freight noise echoed from town and then disappeared. Heat baked back. Water steamed from clothes in a slow patience. Flies returned and found their old work. Time kept going. First small quiet since the yard was a low cut, where a boulder gave shade, and the shelf widened by a wagon length. Teller eased Ash under the rock lip, tied off to a cedar twist, pulled a clean bandana from the inside pocket of the duster, and wrapped Alma's hands as if doing a commonplace chore. No fuss, no cooing. He poured canteen water across rope burn to rinse grit. She hissed once and fell silent again. He took a strip of waxed linen from the saddlebag and made a better binding. The linen held. Her fingers flexed with stiffness but worked. He marked the angle of the sun, heard horse iron on rock below. The men coming, not many, enough. He considered leaving her in the shade with the canteen and the gelding and walking back to pull the men away. Considered the long habit of going alone where trouble lived. Alma read that thought in the shape of his shoulders before he moved. She stood, placed the canteen back in his hand instead of taking it, and stepped to his left side so her body cast its own small shade where his rope burns reddened. No speech. The denial of his solitude made with posture and breath. She would not leave him alone. They pushed on along the shelf, east wind rising, grit at the teeth. The county opened. A good country when not trying to kill. Drawer after drawer stitched into distance. Cottonwoods like ink strokes along watercourses. Far herds flicking their tails in the heat shimmer. A hawk's shadow ran along the ground beside them, like a companion that needed nothing. At a bend, a rock slide waited, fresh. Last week or yesterday, boulders like sleeping buffalo across the path they had to scramble. Ash went first, careful, ears twisting. Teller found handholds for Alma. She climbed without asking to be lifted. A boot slipped, shale slithered. A stone rolled and struck Teller's shin with a meat thud. Pain sharp enough to brighten his sight. He put the feeling aside and kept the line. A second warning shot from far below ricocheted a dry crack off the cliff, muzzle high. The man wanted fear more than blood. A small mercy beyond the slide, the shelf widened again, and a narrow wooden bridge crossed a side cut. 2 logs, planks pinned with spikes, a rope rail on one side only, sun-silvered, creaking. The third hazard stood here and pretended to be help. Bridgewood old rope frayed, a simple sentence written in material. Teller checked knots and pushed down with his weight. Planks answered with a tired complaint. He led Ash across with care. Alma followed, hand at the rope, eyes forward. The bridge took them because it had not decided to kill today. Behind, the men reached the rockfall and argued about whether to lead their horses or shoot at shadows. The voice of the foreman tried to make order out of impatience and lost. Afternoon stretched. Heat eased a fraction. Clouds piled over the blue mountains like sheep. Thunder too far to count. Yet, they dropped into a basin where a winter line shack sat raw against rabbit brush. A square of unpainted boards, a stovepipe like a crooked finger, a door held by a hook and a nail, used by whoever needed it, cattle hands or men with small reasons. Teller pushed the door. Hinges complained. Inside smelled of old kerosene and mouse. Alma looked once around, saw a tin of coffee, a stub of tallow, a wool blanket, a book with no cover left by someone who found lonely long before them. She shook out the blanket in the yard to empty moths and spread it in the shade. Hands bandaged, movements precise. Teller cut jerky, hard and salt, poured coffee grounds into an iron pot and set it to boil with creek water, fetched in a dented bucket. The fire he built was small and polite, smoke thin to keep from telling the basin stories about them. A storm line grumbled on the horizon like an old man deciding whether to stand. Alma ate slow, drank water first, then coffee, eyes steady. Fear lived in the corners but did not run her anymore. She watched Teller's wrists swelling under the rope burn, watched him flex fingers to make sure they still belonged to him. Watched him look north and then east and then at the ground, counting choices. The foreman found the basin at sunset with 2 men, their horses blown, faces streaked with creek mud and dust. They held back at the far cottonwood because storms make some men suddenly religious, and the light made everything look like judgment. Thunder walked closer. The smell of rain moved ahead of it. Teller stood with hands empty and shoulders loose, revolver still holstered. Muzzle down. Ash ground a hoof and snorted. Alma stood at Teller's left again, shawl pinned with a stick she had carved to keep it from falling in the wind. She faced them as if the basin were a parlor and the men were late to supper by choice, words first, small ones. The foreman wanted his paper and his false law to matter. Teller's answer was a line of plain fact. She is not property, not shouted as if he read a weather sign. The men looked to the sky and then back. The storm closed the distance in 3 hard breaths. Sheets of water swept the basin from west to east. Dust became paste. The horses rolled their eyes white. Lightning laced the ridge. The 4th hazard arrived with rain and gravity together. A flash flood came through the side cut where the bridge stood. A brown tongue of water foamed with sticks and weeds and bits of fence. It ate the first 2 planks in a casual bite and took the rope with a lazy pull. The foreman cursed because a plan had ended. The men tried to ride the muddy edge and their horses disagreed. One went to a knee. The rider went to the ground. No blood, only fear. The basin filled and drank and filled again. Water sheeted off the shack roof in silver ropes. Wind threw grit and rain together so hard it felt like a pinion. Teller moved when the flood moved. Action matched to event. He dragged the waterlogged fence rails from behind the shack and slammed them as braces across the door so the shack would not walk away in the current. Alma pulled the coffee pot off the stones with a gunny rag, closed the lid with her bandaged knuckles, set it inside on the table, then came back out to wedge rocks against the rails while the wind tried to steal her shawl. She lost the shawl, then found it against the wheel rut and tied it tighter around shoulders already soaked. The rope burn bled again through linen and made a pale pink that rain washed away as soon as it showed. The foreman thought the flood was an ally and tried to use it. He pushed his men to circle and come from the east where the basin rose in steps and a choke point gave cover. Teller saw the move and answered with clean geometry. He walked to the open ground where a line of willows grew low and fired 2 warning shots into the wet dust, one to the left, one to the right. Careful, muzzle away from any body, sound flat and heavy under rain. The horses of the men sat back and spun from the noise and from lightning that came down close enough to count 2. The men lost their line and their nerve at the same time. The foreman shouted as if he could order water and thunder and nerves. Thunder did not take work. Night came, not murky, just dim and loud. The storm stepped north with the usual indifference of weather. The basin breathed out steam. A cool rose. The shack wood ticked as it cooled. Teller set a tin cup of coffee by Alma's left hand and she wrapped both palms around it for heat. Despite the bandages, the two did not speak much. Rain made speech small anyway. They kept watch by turns. Not sleeping, only letting the mind rest behind the eyes for a few minutes at a time. Dawn rose, clear and clean, and made every blade of grass look newly invented. Bright daylight again as required by a world that prefers to be seen after it has tried to kill. Steam lifted from the basin floor. The flood shrank to a brown ribbon. Birds returned greedy. The air carried the smell of wet iron and sage. Teller rolled the blanket tight. Alma folded it again, and that small correction made him smile in a way that barely showed. Ash shook himself and sprayed both with clean water, and a sense that life goes on. The foreman's men had gone in the night. Tracks told their own story. But the foreman had not left. A single set of prints came down from the east rise, deliberate. A man with an idea that would either work or end him. He stood above them on the cut bank with the sun behind him. Hat brim a hard line, pistol in hand but not leveled. The 5th hazard waited in his posture. Desperation is sharper than malice. The basin held quiet, like a breath. Teller did not reach for his own gun. He lifted both hands out from his side so the foreman could see they were empty. Alma stepped between the line of the foreman's arm and Teller's chest. No drama, only a placement. A simple shape that changed 100 possibilities into a few, bandaged hands open as if measuring the distance between morning and what it could be. "Move aside," the foreman said, voice hoarse, sun a thin rim of fire along his hat. The bank edge under his boots had been eaten by the flood and did not look like it could carry a long conversation. Teller said 2 words. "Come down." Not a threat, an instruction to another human to choose ground that would hold. The foreman did not hear. He shifted 1 step to set a better stance, and the shelf broke like a crust on soup. Gravel gave. The man fell the short fall that feels long. Pistol spun from his hand and slid toward the water. The bank caught him in a hard seat. He yelled a word that had no power. Then lay there like a boy who had run too fast. Teller went forward, took the pistol with the toe of his boot and slid it into the creek. Water swallowed it with a small happy sound. The foreman scrambled to his knees and then to his feet, and looked for rage and found only embarrassment and a bruise he would admire later. He did not try again. There are moments when men meet the limits of their own appetite for harm, and this was one. He spat mud and walked away along the bank, with shoulders that tried to pretend command but told on themselves. Noon made a gold world. Heat returned, but in a friendly way. They rebuilt what they could. Bridge first, because bridges keep places speaking to each other. Teller fell to deadfall with a small cross-cut blade from the shack wall. Cut 2 lengths, rolled them with a fence post for leverage. Alma hauled brush and wove willow with bandaged hands until the rope rail had a fresh skin. Ash stood with a hind leg cocked and watched and flicked flies lazily. Small chores arranged the day into a kind of answer. Teller set his 2 silver dollars on the new bridge and looked at them, the way men look at things that have done too much work for their size. Then he picked them up and placed them in Alma's palm. Coin on coin, round and heavy, and told her with very few words that her road could fork now. A north track to the mission and a room with a window and a school to teach at, or an east track where a grey gelding carried a drifter toward a high pass and a work no one could see from here. Alma closed her fingers over the coins and felt the weight of choices and of metal and of a day and night that had changed her bones. She lifted his hand, turned it over. Rope burns reddened like new map lines, and put both coins back into his palm. Then she closed his fingers and held them shut, the gesture small as 1,000 things that decide a life. Refusal made for the third time in one day. She would not leave him alone, not to make him her keeper, not to make him her debt, but to set her steps beside his where the ground gave and the air said, "Be careful." The words she chose were simple. Together, spoken low and meant hard. Teller's jaw unclenched for the first time since noon the day before. They left the basin in bright light, Ash's ears forward, saddlebags repacked, the shawl folded tidy at last and tied cross-body so it would stay when wind came. Halma's dress cleaned as much as creek water and Patience could manage, hem still ripped at the left knee, bandages neat under fresh strips of linen, Teller's shin bruised, palm raw, both moving well enough. They took the ridge road, and the world opened like a book. A deer stepped from shade and watched them pass. A red kite hung in the high air, as if pinched to the blue by an invisible hand. The day grew warm and kind, and the map ahead looked like something two sets of boot prints could understand, when the county finally put a small stampede in their way. Because the West keeps its promises, it came not as malice, but as a late gate left open on the far graze. A ripple in a herd broke into a run toward them across a shallow draw, heads high, dust lifting, 100 hooves like one hard rain. Teller took Ash to the right. Alma moved with him without being told. They found a rock shoulder and stood with the gelding between them and the wave. Teller fired once into the dust, high and left, to turn the line. Then once high and right, muzzle away from anything living, sound big, pain small. The herd curved around the rock like water around a post. A young steer stumbled, stood, snorted, ran again. No bodies broke, no bones spoke. Dust settled as fast as it had risen, the air filled with the sweet rank of cattle and the hum of resolved trouble. By late afternoon they dropped into Brightwater Crossing, where a wide bend in a clean river made willows lean, and a strip of meadow invited sleep. They washed rope burns again, cleaned the shin, retied the shawl with a proper knot, shared the last of the jerky and a heel of bread that had survived in a saddlebag. Teller showed Alma how to twist 2 strands of willow into cord while it was still green, and she laughed once when it slipped and snapped back at her wrist. The kind of laugh that comes out surprising and stays. He looked at that sound as if it were a landmark on a chart, ending warm and in daylight. They lay side by side on the grass, not touching, only close. Hats tipped over eyes. Ash grazed nearby with the hobbles loose. River spoke in small voices. Cotton puffs from willow seed floated and caught on Alma's sleeve, and she did not brush them away. Birds argued in the reeds without consequence. The sky promised nothing and took nothing back. Work would begin again when they stood. Work always waited. For now a pause like clear water in a tin cup at noon voice that had carried them through. 2 coins changed hands at a freight yard, and the West moved a little on its hinge, not because money is magic, but because choice taken in daylight sets other choices in motion. A woman who had been treated like paper stepped until the ground answered back with her own weight. A man who had lived by leaving learned that staying beside someone could be the harder trail and the better one. The country remained what it was, indifferent and beautiful, ready to test any plan, yet under a sky without ceiling, 2 people made a small, durable treaty with each other and with the hours ahead. And sometimes that is all a life asks for, and all a story must end with. If this story held you for even a moment, if you felt that dust, that choice, that line where 2 people decided not to let go, stay with us. Follow Wild Frontier Tales and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.